I'll yield back.
Ms. DeGette for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Nelson, you had told several other members that you toured a food laboratory in Beijing at the part of the China Inspection and Quarantine Office is one of those. I take it that those offices are roughly the equivalent of an FDA district or regional office with a lab. Is that right?
That's correct.
Can you talk about what you saw at that laboratory during your visit to that lab?
Well, none of us here is a scientist, much less a food scientist. But as you are aware, we've been to a number of FDA labs during the course of this investigation, particularly those that the FDA has threatened to shut down. And we have some acquaintanceship with what the various and sundry machines look like. And the Beijing CIQ lab was equipped, the visual opinion of a non-scientist here, was equipped at least as well as any lab, FDA lab we saw in the United States. And we have no reason to believe that they're food scientists are any less qualified. The question is Beijing atypical? And the response is probably.
It's atypical?
Yes.
And why do you say it is probably atypical?
Because everyone, or not everyone, the people we talk to that either in the U.S. government or in our multinational corporations that have businesses throughout China, that have knowledge of the way things operate throughout China, believe that the quality of inspection, the quality of sampling, the quality of regulation varies widely among the provinces.
And how many of these labs are there throughout China?
Well, the Ministry of Agriculture told us there were 323 labs capable of certifying that food meets international standards. When we got talking to the AQSIQ, they reduced that number to 50.
What's the AQSIQ?
That's the agency in China that's responsible for food exports.
Okay. What did they say?
They said 50.
50. And you don't have any idea what the staffing levels or the technological levels of those offices are?
No.
Now, did you talk to the Chinese about the problems we've been having here, in particular the melamine and the wheat gluten?
Yes.
Did any of you, Mr. Barstow?
Yes.
Okay. How did they explain that? Mr. Wilfong?
Yes, ma'am. The wheat gluten, we had a long discussion with AQSIQ with the Vice Minister Wei, and it was repeatedly brought up that while China is willing to certify, AQSIQ is willing to certify their food exports, which they require all food exports to be certified, tested and certified as food. The wheat gluten incident, the melamine and the wheat gluten, was a way that, since the U.S. does not recognize the certification, the FDA doesn't require it for imports from China, therefore it's not looked for on the paperwork on this end. The wheat gluten was actually exported from China as industrial use.
So they didn't consider that to be food. Is that what you're saying?
On their end, it was exported as industrial use, not as food. And then the disconnect between the two systems on this end, since that certification isn't required and looked for a food import, on this end it was actually imported as a food product.
Oh, so it was a problem. It was a problem in the two countries' standards and what it was called and what was required to be reported.
Yes, ma'am, and that's their main contention, is that they're willing to certify the food for export, their exports of food, that they do certify all food they export. Yet our lack of recognition and requirement for these certifications leaves a big loophole for validative companies to actually import into the United States or export to the United States.
And they say that's not their problem. If there's a loophole, that's not their problem.
Oh, they recognize the problem. It was we had probably a 1-hour discussion with this vice minister, and he brought it up 3 times that They really wish we would recognize their certifications. They're doing the work on their end. We're just not requiring that certification paperwork on our end.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. What about the processing system? I mean, that's at the lab. What about coming up to the export level? Mr. Nelson?
What their system is, and we watched this in the Beijing CIQ, is that an export certificate has to come from a farm or a food processor that is approved, registered and approved for exporting. And that requires some form of local inspection. So only a certain number of entities can bring a request for an export certificate to the CIQs. And allegedly, a CIQ inspector samples the proposed lot from the lot, brings it to the CIQ laboratory, where it is then tested to both Chinese and international standards. If it meets those standards, it is granted a certificate, and that information is transferred electronically to the proposed port of exit, so that people can feel assured that what has been tested is what gets loaded. Now, if the system worked like that, it is a very safe, closed system. No one that we talk to in the industry really thinks that it works well, but it works better than products that are exported from China without